Peter Hitchens is here to talk some sense, thankfully, after an hour of madness. Hello.
Good morning.
Bison being reintroduced into the wilds of Canterbury, which is my favourite story of the day. We could talk about that.
It's thrilling, isn't it?
It is very thrilling.
I hope they get on with all the wild boar, which will
That's right.
roaming the country.
People are complaining that apparently cattle and regular cows are bad for the climate, but bison are good for the climate. How does that exactly work?
Well, that's great then, isn't it?
Yeah.
Then that's obviously the argument which resolves everything. If it's good for the climate, then it's a good thing.
Yes.
Like electric cars.
Yes.
Which are actually terrible for the climate, but everybody's been gulled into thinking they're wonderful. So people are buying them at vast prices.
Yes.
And then going out and discovering the battery goes flat much sooner than they were told it would.
And they
can't then charge it because there are no charges. But nonetheless, it's a government policy and it's green, so everyone's in favour of it.
It must be good. They've also forgotten that government policy way back when young Miliband was Ed Miliband was the Environment Secretary under Gordon Brown's government. They told us all to buy diesel cars because they were good for the environment.
All kinds of things have been said in time. If you made a list, some of the people who were involved with Lovelock, I think, in the current global warming frenzy used to be about 25 years ago, releasing on Ice Age. In medical terms, it's fantastic. When we had our first child, we were told very, very firmly that we should place her on her front to avoid cot death.
Yeah.
And within 2 years, the advice has been completely reversed.
Yeah.
But nobody ever said, look, we're awfully sorry, we told you the wrong thing, it was very dangerous. They just changed it, and when you challenged them about it, they said, what, us? No, surely not.
Well, it was
never happened.
But it was like that during COVID, wasn't it? Do you remember when they said there's absolutely no point wearing a mask?
That's right.
Do anything. And then later, you must wear a mask because it will prevent you getting COVID.
I keep these bits of paper because well, you have to keep the bits of paper because the advice which was on the internet from the government saying don't bother with masks, they're a waste of time, disappeared.
Right.
And if you hadn't kept the printed version, you wouldn't ever be able to find it again. The complete memory hole 1984 stuff.
Yes. It's incredible, isn't it, what they do? Let's talk about the trains, though, first of all, because obviously that's the current sort of big story, the heat wave that we are currently encompassed and experiencing is apparently going to kill thousands of people, according to the doommongers. I really don't see how they can come out with stuff like that.
I don't know either. I have no idea whether anyone is going to die as a result. And obviously there are medical conditions which are made worse by hot weather, and people suffer from them. And everyone should do everything they can to help anybody they know who suffers from those. But there is, it seems to me, to be a rather large overreaction here. We're already predicting. And I was told by friends of mine in the railway industry, as I refer to the nice people at Oxford Station who I see every morning, that at least one of the railway companies was already running trains at restricted speeds at 7 o'clock this morning. When it couldn't possibly have been hot enough to justify. Now, it's theoretically possible the rails could get so hot that they expand and buckle. It's not, you can't rule it out, but I think it's quite difficult for it to happen in this country, and it certainly doesn't happen at 7 in the morning. It's overreaction. All these maps with great red pulsing boils on them, suggesting that everything's fantastically hot, only spread the idea that we can't cope with hot weather. I think we're told that the line from London to York is going to close tomorrow because it wasn't built to cope with temperatures of this kind. Well, wasn't it?
Right.
Did the Victorians, who seem to me to have been pretty skilled engineers, really not consider the possibility there might be a few hot days when they built those railway lines? I don't know. It's a bizarre thing to say.
The people who are telling me that for some reason our railway lines are constructed differently to every other country in the world, I'm not sure that that's true. Two, why would that be the case? And also, these things feed into one another. I was listening to Julie Hartley-Brewer this morning talking to a head teacher, as she called herself, an education leader was another thing she called herself, said, well, of course, we're going to send the children home early because there might not be any trains or buses, so we'd like to make sure that they get home before the buses stop running. So that's now a reason to stop telling people that they need to send their children to school.
Well, exactly. One thing leads to another. The same thing happened in the COVID panic. One thing led to another. The decision to close the schools, I think, is now recognised by everybody with more than a minimal IQ as being one of the stupidest decisions ever taken in the history of this country. But on the other hand, can one really get terribly worked up about it, given the state of the schools that we have? But that's another problem.
Well, given the state of Manchester University, where now you apparently have to refer to your mother and father as your parents, or your guardians, and your sister, brother as a sibling.
Okay. Well.
So, There we are. Let's talk about the electric vehicle piece you wrote, because I experienced an awful lot of sort of what can be called incoming this weekend. I was walking around the streets of London a fair bit, and the number now has increased significantly. You know, I saw fewer e-scooters, funnily enough, this weekend, but I saw more electric bikes. And the electric bike problem is huge, it seems to me.
The electric bike is an extremely clever invention by those who've marketed it, because you don't need to pass the elaborate tests that you need to use an ordinary motor vehicle. It's, of course, it doesn't require any petrol, which at a time of rising petrol prices is good. I think you can ride one if you've lost your license.
I don't think you need a license to ride one. No.
Well, no one's checking anyway, because you could get someone else to buy one or hire one for you, and no one would know. So it's basically unlicensed. As these devices are in the third world, anybody can get on them and ride them at pretty much any speed that you like. They're supposed to be restricted to about 15 miles an hour, but actually, again, there are. I'm not going to advertise this, but there are ways, hideously easy ways, in which that can be overcome, so they can go very fast. And of course, they're quiet, and people aren't used to them. It nearly got me a few months ago, before I realised what was going on. Yeah. I saw something approaching late one night, a pedestrian crossing. I thought it was a bicycle, so I thought I had time to cross. Yeah. And then I realised just in time that, in fact, it was powered and was probably doing 30 miles an hour. And so I jumped back in time. Otherwise, I would have been swatted by it. I had no idea it could
Well,
go
I
so
saw
fast.
3 characters on very fast-moving electric bikes with their faces covered in the middle of the day in London on Saturday. And I thought, these people could be going literally anywhere. And then I read about, and I'm not suggesting that these were the people that did it, but then I read about this raid on the Apple store in Covent Garden, and it's the perfect way to get away from a robbery.
It's marvellous.
You know,
no one can chase you. And if you and there's no wearing a mask these days is considered to be perfectly legitimate.
Yes.
Whereas a couple of years ago, if you'd been wandering around London with a mask, people said, "Hang on, why are you doing that?" Now you can do it. And everybody thinks, "Oh, what a generous, selfless chap." But on the other hand, of course, the CCTV cameras cannot work out who you are. So it is an ideal vehicle, as indeed are the e-scooters, for a getaway from an urban crime, and indeed also for mugging people. And I just don't know why everyone's so good. I thought, this is a ridiculous thing, and it shouldn't be being legalised. And when I started writing about it, I thought other people would join in and say, yes, that's true, and then they'd look at the example of Paris, where they were a disaster when they were legalised, and people would say, let's not have this. And I just found myself not merely more or less on my own saying it, but people say, haven't you got anything more important to write about? Well, of course I have. Right. But on the other hand, if no one else was doing it, then I felt a duty to say, look, this is a serious problem. Grant Shapps should not be legalising e-scooters, and he should be doing something to restrict e-bikes, but nothing happens. And within 4 or 5 years, these things, which appeal to several of the lower instincts of man, but particularly laziness, will be incredibly common, and people will wish that we'd done something to stop them.
Yeah, well, there was another death, wasn't there, on Monday of last week, so a week ago. A man died after a crash on an e-scooter in Luton. He was actually riding it, 33-year-old, came off the device on a footpath, and was killed pretty much instantly. Well, because when you go at that kind of speed, and you know, it's a lethal weapon.
They're inherently unsafe. I mean, all motor vehicles are inherently unsafe, which is why normal motor vehicles are very seriously regulated in who can drive them, where you can drive them, and how fast they can go. But these things, which are motor vehicles and are quite powerful, are not seriously regulated at all. Neither are their riders, and that is the great conundrum. How have we got into this mess?
Yes. Now, we just announced there that the Sky debate is over. Yeah. It's not happening. You wrote at the weekend that you haven't written much about the contenders for the leadership of the Tory party because there isn't any point.
Well, I'm choosing between... people say, well, who is your favourite Tory leadership candidate? And I say, what's your favourite disease? It's not really a thing in which I can have a favourite, because to me, none of these people show any signs of being conservative. Yeah. I'm sorry, arguments about tax and not tax are not arguments about conservative politics. They're just arguments about what you can get away with. And anyway, all these people, I did watch some of the thing last night until I lost the will to live. Yeah. All of these people are handicapped by one thing. They all supported the mad, disproportionate COVID measures, which have put our economy in the dustbin.
Yeah.
And so for any of them to stand up there and pose as if they have any idea how to run the economy is axiomatically absurd. None of them did. There's not a one of them who even the supposedly sainted Lieutenant General Tugendhat didn't stand up against this nonsense at all. In fact, I think rather the reverse.
Yeah.
So they've got nothing to say about economics. If they supported that and Rishi Sunak's magic money tree, they've disqualified themselves from any discussion about government spending. So why listen to them? Where are they on actual conservative policies?
Yes.
You never hear a thing.
Well, they don't seem to have very many of those. And they both apparently, one of the reasons they've cancelled this next debate is because they both called Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak both accused the other of being socialist.
Yes, well,
I think they're both right.
They may both have been right, and that's the problem. You can't have the truth coming out.
No.
But I've been saying this for years. People say, what? The Conservative Party is a left-wing party? Yes, it is.
Yeah.
No, how can you say a thing like that? They say, well, because it's true.
Yeah.
And now it seems to me they've blown the gaff.
Yeah.
It is, indeed.
I think that's right.
A left-wing party, and now they're calling each other left-wing. Was so good.
Finally,
let's uncancel this debate and have more of that.
And we've just been discussing this development over in Ukraine, where Vladimir Zelensky has suspended his security chief and top prosecutor in a case which he says revolves around treasonous behaviour. He says that there's been a lot of collaboration at the top end of the military in Ukraine with Russia. What do you make of this, Peter?
Well, the only thing one can make of it is that things are not going particularly well for the Ukrainian armed forces in the war, which is a thing that has been rumbling underneath. Some of the heavy newspapers have been beginning to report that it's not wholly successful over the past couple of weeks, and it has, I have to say, the tinge of panic to me when you start talking about treason and
arresting people.
And arresting people. But it's very interesting. What struck me is that, as so often when there are reverses for Ukraine in this war, people are not particularly anxious to discuss them because there's a kind of almost football game feeling. This is our team, and their problems are not really to be dwelt on. But I think from any serious news point of view, if there are problems, they should be properly reported. I'd like to know a lot more about it, frankly.
This is the weird thing. I mean, we're going to talk later on this in the show in the afternoon to Major General Vladimir Havrilov, who is the Deputy Defence Minister of Ukraine, who's going to be with us. So we'll put a few questions to him and find out.
Well, I hope you get something out of it.
What is going on? Because you also wrote at the weekend about Joe Biden and MBS, as he's known, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia.
Yes, it's extraordinary. If we have, as we constantly say we have, this tremendously stern moral position towards Russia because of its horrible way of murdering dissidents and throwing people in prison and invading innocent countries and all the other awful things that it does, then how come Joe Biden, who's publicly admitted that and stated himself in, I think, his election campaign that Saudi Arabia was a pariah state, how come he feels the necessity to go? And I won't say grovel, but certainly pay a sort of public tribute to this dreadful man. I mean,
well, it looked a bit like a grovelling episode, didn't it?
People go on rightly about the poisonings of people by the Russian state in London and elsewhere. Well, nobody doubts the CIA has established that with the full knowledge of MBS, Khashoggi, the Washington Post journalist and Saudi dissident, was killed and dismembered in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul.
By a team of people who appear to have been sent in there by Saudi Arabia.
Well, no one seriously argues that this isn't a government crime. This is also kind of when Johnson went out there for a similar kowtow a few months ago. I think a couple of days before he arrived, they executed 81 people. It is the most terrible bloodstained tyranny, and we cannot, I don't think, maintain that we're morally motivated if we do this. It's like we go on and on, for instance, about how the horrible President Assad of Syria kills his own people. Well, he does, and his regime is a horrible morass of torture and murder. But the Egyptian government, with which we have very good relations, also kills its own people. People were gunned down in large numbers on the streets of Cairo only a few years ago by this very regime, and yet we're nice to them. I think we really need to start pulling our heads in a bit on this, on the moralising about foreign policy. People will say to me, well, this is whataboutery, as if that dismissed it. But I don't see what's wrong with whataboutery. Actually, whataboutery is in the Bible, where our Lord Jesus Christ says, observe the mote in the beam in your own eye before busying yourself with the speck in somebody else's. That is whataboutery.
Yeah.
It is straightforward hypocrisy to do these things, and hypocrisy is wrong. And to dismiss the accusation of hypocrisy as whataboutery is not to dismiss it at all. It doesn't overcome it. No. We are very hypocritical about this, and frankly, I'm tired of it.
Yeah, and it doesn't take away from the horrors of one dictator to point out that there's another dictator that does the same thing.
Absolutely
the first
not.
dictator still remains horrific.
But if that is our principle, if we really won't deal with people because of their horrific internal regimes or their aggressions abroad, then we can't really have anything to do with Saudi Arabia. But if we can have anything to do with Saudi Arabia, then don't be surprised if Western leaders who are now saying that Putin is an impossible monster and a pariah, don't be surprised if they're back in contact with him within a couple of years, because actually all this is bombast and propaganda, and it's not real. Right. So don't, in general, be taken in by it.
No, of course.
That's the general.
And I mean, the same can be said for China, presumably, as well.
Oh, the China permanently.
Who we are constantly trying to sort of, ingratiate ourselves with in terms of trade.
Appalling police state, concentration camps, and if anybody else did what the Chinese are doing to the Uyghur minority in the far west of China, they would be accused of genocide.
Yeah.
But because it's China, everyone treads very softly around it. And there it is. It's all to do with what we need and how weak and how strong we are. And I think we should have less of it. I understand. I've spent a lot of time covering foreign policy in my life. I understand foreign policy has to be quite cynical. But I think there are limits to how much you can simultaneously act in a cynical fashion and pretend to be acting in a cynical in a principled fashion. Yeah. If you're going to be cynical, then be cynical, but don't pretend while you're being cynical that you're being principled.
Quite. Now, speaking of which, Priti Patel says she's going to target well-off cannabis users with plans to confiscate their passports and issue bans to nightclubs. I'm not sure people that smoke a lot of cannabis go to nightclubs, do they?
I have no idea, as someone who does neither. But I just would like to point out that there's a long history of pretend threats of this kind, going back, I think, to Ian Blair when he was head of the Metropolitan Police, saying he was going to have a crackdown on middle-class cocaine users, which, as far as I know, has yet to materialise, even though he has long retired.
Yes.
So I don't think anything will happen. I wish it would. I wish the government and the police and the courts would actually enforce the quite stern provisions of the 1971 Misuse of Drugs Act, particularly on the very dangerous and unpleasant drug marijuana. But I don't see any sign of it. I just think this is just somebody playing for playing to what she imagines to be a conservative gallery. I think she may be disappointed if she thinks she's going to get much out of it.
We don't need to cancel any of his passport anymore anyway, because you can't go anywhere. I mean, there's no flights out of town. A lot of cancelled.
A lot of people are having their passports cancelled because they can't get them.
Actually, can't get one. Exactly, it's a very good point. Place. And finally, let's end on a happy note. The roads to freedom.
Surely.
The roads to freedom. You've managed to get it back on television.
It's amazing. It's extraudinary, the power of the press.
I'm so excited.
And here it is. We after all those saying what on earth has happened to this great series.
Yeah.
They've finally decided. They sent me a note on Friday saying it's going to be back on BBC4 starting at 10 p.m. on the 27th. Well, I hope everybody thinks it's as good as I say it is.
It's going to be interesting because I mean I physically haven't seen it since it was first shown when I was basically a kid.
How would you take it?
And my mother wasn't sure that I should be watching it because it was a bit risque in parts.
It's very risque in parts indeed.
But I seem to remember I was quite fond of Georgia Brown.
Georgia Brown, yeah,
and of course the guy who played the main character.
Yeah, Michael Bryant.
And
Alison Fisk is also very...
It was a brilliant piece of television, and so I'm looking forward to it, but with slight reservation, just in case it's not as good as I thought it was.
One of the things about old TV is it's slower than new TV.
Yes.
I thought one of the best television series ever made was Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, the original John le Carre. When I finally saw it again after many years, the thing that I felt mostly is it's a lot slower than we would do now, but there's nothing wrong with slow.
Yes, no, I agree with that. We should all go slowly today. Forgive me there.
Yeah.
I swallowed my own saliva.
Not too slow. Don't encourage the railways.
Don't encourage the railways to go
going
slow.
home at walking pace tonight.
Exactly right. Peter Hitchens, thank you very much indeed.